From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
From the war in Iraq to credit default swaps to the internet bubble to the real estate bubble, too often we got caught up in the hype and failed to see the real truth.
It's graduation season. We'll play the commencement address of six-time Grammy Award-winning musician John Legend. But first, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. No, that's not another commencement address. That's one of the biblical quotes written on top-secret briefings that former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld gave President Bush during the early days of the invasion of Iraq. We'll speak with a reporter who broke the story in GQ. Then the Obama administration's continuing to use a notorious military police unit at Guantanamo that regularly brutalizes prisoners. We'll talk to investigative journalist Jeremy Scahill. And today is a global day of action for Georgia death row prisoner Troy Davis. We'll talk to his sister and the executive director of Amnesty International. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The New York Times reports President Bush's former ambassador to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, will soon assume a powerful, unelected position running the Afghan government. Under a plan being discussed with Afghan President Hamid Karzai and the Obama administration, Khalilzad could essentially become the unelected CEO of Afghanistan, taking away power now held by the democratically elected Karzai. Karzai's ties to the United States have deteriorated recently, in part because of his vocal criticism over the rising number of civilian casualties due to U.S. airstrikes. Zalmay Khalilzad was born in Afghanistan but is now a U.S. citizen. He served as President Bush's ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, and the United Nations. The Obama administration claims it's not behind the idea of inserting Khalilzad into the Afghan government, but Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Special Envoy Richard Holbrooke have been involved in the discussions. 2 months ago, The Guardian of London reported the Obama administration and European allies were preparing to plant a high-profile figure in the heart of the Afghan government in a direct challenge to Karzai. President Obama is scheduled today to issue a new national emissions and mileage requirement for cars and light trucks. The rules aim to cut emissions by 30% and require passengers required to average 39 miles per gallon and light trucks 30 miles per gallon by 2016. The White House estimates the regulations would save 1.8 billion barrels of oil and reduce emissions of greenhouse gases by 900 million metric tons over the lifetime of the more efficient vehicles, equivalent to taking 177 million cars off the road or shutting down 194 coal-fired power plants. Daniel Becker of the Safe Climate Campaign praised Obama's plan. He said, quote, "This is the single biggest step the American government has ever taken to cut greenhouse gas emissions." The cost of new vehicles is expected to rise by at least $1,300 by 2016. At a White House meeting Monday, Israel's new Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, refused to endorse a two-state solution or to agree to President Obama's request to halt the construction of settlements in the occupied West Bank. Obama and Netanyahu held a news conference Monday after their private meeting.
Now, Israel is going to have to take some difficult steps as well. And I shared with the Prime Minister the fact that under the roadmap and under Annapolis, there's a clear understanding that we have to make progress on settlements, that settlements have to be stopped in order for us to move forward. That's a difficult issue. I recognize that. But it's an important one, and it has to be addressed. I think the humanitarian situation in Gaza has to be addressed.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel doesn't want to govern the Palestinians, but he did not endorse an independent Palestinian state.
I want to make it clear that we don't want to govern the Palestinians. We want to live in peace with them. We want them to govern themselves, absent a handful of powers that could endanger the state of Israel. And for this, there has to be a clear goal. The goal has to be an end to conflict. There'll have to be compromises by Israelis and Palestinians alike. We're ready to do our share. We hope the Palestinians will do their share as well.
After the meeting, Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat criticized Netanyahu's comments.
Unfortunately, Mr. Netanyahu failed to mention the two-state solution, failed to mention agreement signed, failed to mention his commitment to stop settlement activities, and the only thing he mentioned was Palestinians entitled to govern themselves by themselves. How can I govern myself by myself as a Palestinian with his occupation going on my neck on the hour, every hour, with his roadblocks segregating our towns and villages and refugee camps?
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama also discussed Iran on Monday.
But if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, it could give a nuclear umbrella to terrorists, or worse, could actually give terrorists nuclear weapons, and that would put us all in great peril. So in that context, I very much appreciate, Mr. President, your firm commitment to ensure that Iran does not develop nuclear military capability, and also your statement that you're leaving all options on the table.
President Obama told Netanyahu that his administration may back a new set of sanctions against Iran.
We are engaged in a process to reach out to Iran and persuade them that it is not in their interest to pursue a nuclear weapon and that they should change course. But I assured the Prime Minister that we are not foreclosing a range of steps, including much stronger international sanctions, in assuring that Iran understands that we are serious.
Efforts have been launched to disbar 12 former Bush administration attorneys connected to the administration's torture program. On Monday, a coalition of advocacy groups called the Velvet Revolution filed disciplinary complaints with state bar licensing boards on the grounds that the attorneys violated the Geneva Conventions, the Convention Against Torture, and American law. The attorneys targeted are John Yoo, Jay Bybee, Stephen Bradbury, Alberto Gonzalez, John Ashcroft, Michael Chertoff, Alice Fisher, William Haynes, Douglas Feith, Michael Mukasey, Timothy Flanagan, and David Addington. President Obama is seeking $46 million to establish a new military facility in Colombia. The funding request has been opposed by several advocacy groups. John Lindsay Poland of the Fellowship of Reconciliation said, quote, "This base would feed a failed drug policy, support an abusive army, and reinforce a tragic history of U.S. military intervention in the region." The Pentagon's been looking for a new site in Latin America ever since Ecuador notified Washington last year it would not renew the lease on the U.S. base in Manta, Ecuador. Meanwhile, former U.S. President Bill Clinton is expected to be named today the new United Nations Special Envoy to Haiti. The Supreme Court's blocked a lawsuit against former Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller filed by a Pakistani man. Javed Iqbal was among thousands of Muslim men rounded up after September 11th. According to his lawsuit, he was held in solitary confinement, subjected to numerous beatings, and denied medical care. He eventually pleaded guilty to identity fraud and was deported to Pakistan. In news from Africa, the Nigerian military continues to carry out attacks in the oil-rich Niger Delta in an effort to oust militant groups from the region. The military has reportedly attacked largely civilian areas with gunboats and helicopters. As many as 30,000 civilians are displaced without adequate food or water, and aid agencies have been barred from the region. On Monday, militants vowed to blockade key waterways in the Niger Delta to try to prevent crude oil exports. For years, the militant groups have fought for fair distribution of oil wealth to local communities in the impoverished region. This is Asani Dokubo of the Niger Delta Volunteer Force.
We will not stop. I will not stop. I will continue. We'll continue to proceed by any means necessary. If they bring peace, we'll hold on to peace. If they bring war, we'll hold on to war. Because if they cannot be shooting us, and we cannot just be raising our hand and falling and dying. No, we're going to put up a fight.
The state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has joint venture partnerships with major oil companies, including Shell and Chevron, in the Niger Delta. Next week, Shell will stand trial in New York for its alleged role in the 1995 state execution of the Nigerian writer and activist Ken Saro-Wiwa, as well as 8 others. Meanwhile, a group of environmental organizations have accused Shell of being the most carbon-intensive oil company in the world. In a report issued today to coincide with the company's annual shareholder meeting, Shell is criticized for its reliance on Nigerian crude oil, which is associated with huge levels of gas flaring, liquefied natural gas, which is highly energy-intensive, and oil from Canada's tar sands. Shell revealed to investors last year that 30% of its total resources are tar sands.